Olá, bem-vindas e bem-vindos! Eu sou a Mariana Almeida e este é o McKinsey Talks, direto do estúdio da McKinsey em São Paulo. Uma plataforma de jogos, um canal de publicidade ou uma ferramenta de treinamento? O que é realmente o metaverso e por que tanto se fala sobre ele hoje? O fato é que o metaverso pode ser tudo isso e muito mais. Ele pode ser o que as pessoas quiserem. Apesar de o termo já estar circulando há décadas, a sua definição ainda é fluida. Mas o que nós já sabemos é que, além de hype, o metaverso é real para muitos. Para a geração Z, que representa 30% da população brasileira e será mais da metade da população mundial em 2030, o metaverso é um jeito de se relacionar com os outros e com o mundo. Um artigo da McKinsey nos mostra que, em 2021, o investimento de venture capital e private equity no metaverso alcançou 13 bilhões de dólares. E, em 2022, esse valor vai crescer ainda mais. O artigo foi escrito a partir de uma pesquisa com mais de 3.400 consumidores e executivos sobre a adoção do metaverso, seu potencial e como ele pode mudar comportamentos. Para falar sobre esse incrível tema e tirar as suas principais dúvidas sobre o metaverso, está conectado conosco Hamza, sócio em Londres e um dos autores do estudo. Por isso, a nossa conversa hoje será em inglês. Hello Hamza, welcome. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
E também está aqui ao meu lado no estúdio a Fernanda Hoefel, sócia da McKinsey em São Paulo e líder da prática de consumo e varejo no Brasil, que vai nos ajudar a tangibilizar o potencial do metaverso em casos de usos reais. Olá, Fernanda, bem-vinda, é um prazer tê-la aqui conosco.
Obrigada, bom dia, Mariana, bom dia a todo mundo.
So let's get started. Hamza, as I mentioned in the opening, you are one of the authors of this article on Metaverse that became a hit. I guess the Metaverse is still a mystery to many people. How are people currently engaging with the Metaverse and how consumer behavior is evolving?
So in very many different ways, and consumer behavior is evolving very fast. One of the misconceptions we try and address is that the Metaverse is basically just online gaming being rebranded and remarketed. And I think it's fair to say that gaming has been the launchpad that has and continues to seed the early days of the Metaverse. But the Metaverse already goes far beyond that, right? So yes, there are the gaming-related use cases. There are 3 billion gamers in the world. Even if you take just the one gaming platform like Roblox, it has roughly 200 million active users per month. These are huge numbers we're talking about even within gaming. So even just to say that this is just gaming is pretty big. But outside of it, what is happening is it's evolved beyond gaming into digital entertainment more broadly. So you have some of these large virtual worlds that have concerts with A-list artists. You have activities that get into fitness, into brand engagement, into purchases, into buying virtual goods. We ran research very recently with roughly 3,500 respondents globally, and we found that, and these are relatively younger respondents, but we found almost 80% of them have purchased virtual goods already. Right, so yes, gaming is a large part of what consumers are doing right now in large virtual worlds, but it is already far beyond gaming and far beyond digital entertainment.
Great. Fernanda, do you want to say anything else about consumer here in Brazil or in Metaverse in general?
Yeah, I would just comment at this point, that sometimes we tend to think, right, the Metaverse is becoming big, but it's outside of Brazil. This is not true, actually. What we see is that in Brazil, this is also a reality just as much as it is for elsewhere in the world. And not only among Gen Z, right, the ones that were born from 94 onwards, but also to the millennials, which is the generation previous to them. So it's, half the population already very engaged. And I think another noticeable thing is that here in Brazil, right, our DNA is very social. So when we saw, the early beginnings of Instagram, Facebook, even WhatsApp, we are one of the most engaged countries in the world with these platforms. So we also have reason to believe that when the Metaverse picks up, or once it picks up even more, in Brazil it will become big as well.
That's very interesting, yeah. So Hamza, how would you define the Metaverse? What are its main characteristics described in the article?
So that's one of the other big debates that comes up, which is what is the definition? And I think it's important to note up front that it is still early days, and it will take a number of years for the Metaverse, for the end state Metaverse to fully realize, or to fully materialize. So, of course, there is debate on the definition. And we like to think that having that debate is actually a good thing. It's not a bad thing. It doesn't mean that there's nothing real about it. It just means that it's a very disruptive innovation at scale And so of course, it's a little hard to define right now. Now, having said that, the definition that we prefer to use and that we've been using in the report as well is very consciously broad and fairly inclusive. And it's as follows. We define the metaverse as an evolution of the internet from something that we primarily observe today to something that we are much more deeply immersed in. So that's the broad definition that we adopt. And then the main characteristics, I would say, even though that there is like debate on the definition, there is starting to be increasing alignment around the main characteristics. We think there are four main ones. One is persistent, immersive, virtual environments. So persistent being that even when you've logged out of that experience and you come back in the next day, it's not like it just pauses there and it stops and it starts from scratch. These are virtual worlds that are always on in some ways, right? Second is there is a sense of interoperability. So you should be able to take your avatar, your assets, your ID, all of your transaction history, everything from one virtual world to the next, right? So they should be able to interact with each other. Concurrency, which is a big one, which is right now the technical limitations allow roughly 100, 150 people to be in the same virtual environment at the same time. And there's ways to sort of get around that, multiple rooms all sorted together and stuff. But concurrency basically means having thousands of players all at the same time in a virtual world being able to interact with each other. That has bandwidth limitations, that has computing power limitations. And so that's why we're not there yet. But finding a way for thousands of players to coexist and simultaneously interact with each other is a major definitional element. And finally, users having agency. So users being able to do different things, not just interact with fully formed worlds, but they have IDs, they have wallets, they have interactions, they have transactions, they have the ability to connect with other peers, with brands. So being able to do a lot of different things as opposed to just following a scripted path is another main element of the metaverse.
Mm-hmm. Hamza, I thought it was interesting that you mentioned, right, that consumers are, one of the characteristics is that people can do many things in the metaverse. What are the things that people, consumers, and brands are already doing, or the main applications that you see today?
Quite a few actually, and it's starting to go into lots of different use cases. Let's start a little bit on the consumer side. So on the consumer side of things, we talked a little bit about this already. So there is immersive experiences that brands are providing to consumers. So we're not talking about advertising in the sense of a billboard or a display ad in a virtual world. We're talking about full-on immersive worlds, right? So Nike's created Nike World in Roblox. Gucci created Gucci Gardens from Florence, like they made a virtual replica of it. Wendy's, the restaurant chain, has Wendy's World in Meta's Horizon Worlds as well. So these are full-on immersive environments where consumers can go, engage with the brand, take part in activities, earn rewards, be able to cash those rewards in physical locations afterwards. So it's a full, entire immersive branded experience. That's one side of things that consumers are doing. Consumers are also engaging in commerce. So they're buying and selling goods. They're buying from brands, but they're also in the secondary market buying and selling with each other. And so there's a whole NFT market that has actually picked up and it's gone through multiple cycles, but there's a lot of commerce for different goods. And then I would say consumers and individual people are actually starting to evolve into content producers as well. So we've seen the independent creator and the independent developer economy already pick up pace in recent years. And we think that's going to be a big part of who populates the metaverse with content. And we're starting to see real content monetization coming out, not just from the large brands and the large studios, but from individual producers as well. And then the final thing I will say, and we won't get into the details of this right now, is that these are all the consumer use cases. Add on top of that all of the more enterprise-focused or B2B focused use cases. For example, digital twins within manufacturing facilities for operations, for manufacturing layouts. Or, for example, completely immersive sales displays and showrooms for more B2B kind of markets as well. That's already happening as well. That doesn't get as much headlines in the news sometimes, but there's a whole world of enterprise use cases that are fairly active at the same time as well. So fairly vast, fairly diverse, and just continues to increase.
So Hamza, in November 2021, one piece of virtual land in a platform called Decentraland was sold by almost $2.5 million. Another platform called The Sandbox gathered that same month $86.5 million selling land as NFTs. And now we see some memes around the internet, for instance, say, buying a land in Metaverse is the new buying land in the moon or in heaven. And we are seeing many companies investing massively in Metaverse-related initiatives, as you said. Do you consider that troubling or inspiring?
It's a complicated question, so I'll try and answer it in two parts, actually.
Okay.
I think if you talk about the Metaverse overall as a whole, right, and then we'll get to real estate investments in the Metaverse as well. I would say if you talk about the Metaverse as a whole, it is troubling if you view it as something that is exciting brands and marketers and companies, but not exciting consumers. Because then you can say that it's something that's being pushed onto consumers, but consumers don't really want it. I think it is inspiring if you say that consumers do want it, but brands and organizations and marketers are a lot more active this time around compared to previous cycles of digital innovation, because they don't want to make the mistakes of the past. Lots of brands were left behind during e-commerce. Lots of brands weren't fast to catch on to social commerce. But so brands are fine with making new mistakes, but they don't want to make the same mistakes in the past, and that's why they're getting in, right? So in that sense, I would say it's inspiring. So I'm long on the Metaverse. That's my view of the Metaverse. It's okay if it feels like it's a lot of brands doing a lot of different things at the time. That's fine. That's just brands learning from things that they should have done maybe in the past. So I'm long on the Metaverse. I will say, though, that I do think that real estate investment in virtual environments is fairly speculative, and the price is going up and down in some ways with this like artificial constraint of we only have this much land, right? You could always make more land as well. So I'm long on the Metaverse, but I will say that I'm not long on real estate investments in the Metaverse.
So what do you think, Fernanda?
Oh, I cannot comment on that.
You're not buying anything?
If Hamza doesn't know, who am I, right? But I certainly think, and I think we're going to touch on this later on, right? I certainly think brands need to experiment, and I agree with the point that it's time to learn, sooner rather than later if you're a brand.
Yeah, sure. And the study points out to a potential $5 trillion in value generation from the Metaverse by 2030. This is the equivalent to the world's third largest economy today. Where will this value come from, Hamza?
Everywhere. So everyone from large tech companies that are very active in building the different layers of the Metaverse right now, through to, I know you mentioned this at the start as well, through the PE, VC investors that are actually funding some of the startups that are becoming active in this, through to the brands that are building their experiences and environments and goods to engage with consumers in virtual worlds, through to then the agencies, partners, and the whole ecosystem of creators that those brands are working with. So it's in some ways like a whole new ecosystem of players that is emerging. And everyone from investors to large tech players to brands and developers and then eventually consumers are going to be monetizing that. So that's where a lot of this initial investment is coming in from. At the half-year mark this year, we were at 120 billion, which was more than double of all of last year. So it's picking up. And you can always make arguments for and against, or like, how is it going to be impacted by broader macroeconomic conditions, right? And broader macroeconomic conditions in many countries don't look too great right now. But even then, we think like longer term, this is a shift that is going to continue to happen, and there's going to be continued investment in it from lots of different sources. And we're going to see different varying kinds of monetization approaches come out for different stakeholders that are active as well.
Mm-hmm. And Hamza, how would you suggest that companies prepare for this, right? And I admit here that there might be different postures, right? Some will double down, some will be more cautious and experiment. But maybe what's the underlying principle here, and what advice would you give?
So I think, I mean, you're spot on, Fernanda, when you say that the response will vary by the context of the company, right? So by sector, by size, by who your target audience is, by how does this fit into your broader brand engagement and marketing strategy. So there won't be like a single response for all companies. I would say there are a couple of things that companies in general can try and sort of like take the early steps on. Again, back to your point around now's the time to get active and build the capabilities. I think the first thing is a lot of these decision making, a lot of the individuals that make these decisions are reading a lot about it. And I think it would be beneficial for executives and decision makers to actually experience these virtual worlds on their own, right? And it doesn't always take a VR headset. It doesn't always take AR goggles. You can actually like access Roblox and all of the different experiences within Roblox on your phone, right? So doesn't have to be a fully immersive VR experience, but I would say the first thing is for decision makers and businesses to actually experience this for themselves, to be able to see what younger consumers, what Gen Z, what millennials actually go in and see and engage with and spend time on. Having that first-hand experience, I think, is important. Then I think based on that, the sort of that journey of education and immersing yourself in it, then there are things to think about. So how I like to think about this is it's less important to ask the question around what can I do in the metaverse. It's more important to ask the question around what is it that large virtual worlds that are part of the metaverse can do to accelerate our growth and consumer engagement strategy. Because everything has to go back for executives to where are you going to drive growth from, right? And then it's not about the shiny new thing, right? And like, what should I do? It's more about how does that shiny new thing fit into your growth strategy? If it does, then I think, Fernanda, to your point, it's great to take some first steps, work with partners, try some activations, to get the results, see what's working, what's not working, but not go all out on it, right? This is just about a sense of experimentation and learning right now. And if it doesn't fit into your broader marketing strategy right now, then I would suggest then maybe don't take that much action, right? But the big assessment to think through here is not sort of like the fear of missing out kind of thing. I need to do something immediately. It's more about where and how does this fit into my long-term growth strategy? And as a result, what are the actions for me to take now to learn from so that I can take more actions in the future?
So unfortunately, we are reaching the end of our session. Hamza, as a final advice for those who are eager to better understand the opportunities that may be available in the metaverse, how can they become more familiar with it? Well, you just talked a little bit, but do you have like details and how can people go deeper?
So there's a lot of that detail available online. I would say, and again, I'm not promoting one particular solution versus others or a particular app over others. But I would say, just off the top of my head, some of the things you can do on your phone screen, because I think that's the most accessible for very many people. Roblox is available as a world on your phone. I would also say there are apps like Ready Player Me. So what Ready Player Me does is that you can create an avatar and you can use that avatar in very many different worlds. So every week, Ready Player Me adds multiple experiences where you just take the same avatar, the same ID to multiple worlds. You can do that on your phone. Same with Spatial, Spatial. It is a very sort of democratic way of making virtual spaces that, again, is accessible on an app on your phone. So in order to just like try it out and do it in a screen that is fairly accessible to everyone, those are the three that immediately come to mind. But there are very many others as well. But that might be a good starting point.
Hamza, you recommended at some point in a different conversation a book about the metaverse. Which one was it?
Yes. So the book is called The Metaverse and How It Will Revolutionize Everything. The author is Matt Ball. He is, we work with him. McKinsey works with him. He's an advisor to the firm as well. He's been writing about this for very many years now, before everyone got interested in the metaverse, and before even like the term was being used to describe everything that's under it. There are quite a few books now on the topic, as you can imagine. But if I was to make one suggestion, one book that I've read of all the ones that I've read so far that I think it does a great job of explaining it without making it too complicated, I would suggest that one, The Metaverse and How It Will Revolutionize Everything.
Oh, thank you. I'm going to read that one, actually. And one more question, right? I mean, we spoke here a lot about opportunities. But what do you see as the risks and also maybe societal implications that we should be mindful of when approaching the metaverse?
So I think going back to my point around how companies don't want to make the same mistakes of the past and they want to be more active in this going forward, I think there is a place for regulators to also be thinking of this as well, without stopping innovation, right? Because at this point, innovation is the most important thing. But how do you help create an internet that is not just more immersive, but is also safer for users? And I think that conversation, it's already started in the EU, for example. I can tell you at the level of the EU. It started, of course, in the US as well, but it's going to come out to all different countries. And I think this role that regulators have to play to make sure that these massive virtual worlds are safe for people is fairly important. I will say, as part of the research that we did, again, roughly 3,500 respondents globally, we asked them what their main concerns were with this vision of the metaverse and if it comes through, right? And the three main concerns, and then we asked them, give them 10 or 12 options, and the main things that came out, there were three big ones: user safety, data privacy, and privacy of my payment credentials. these three things, you could take out the word metaverse. You could just talk about the internet more broadly as well, and it will probably end up being the same three things. So in some ways, I don't think it is anything specific to the metaverse. Although if you talk about avatars and more immersive experiences, then user safety becomes even more important, right? Because you're going to be immersing yourself in the experience. But I think the concerns are still the ones that we have been working on and have been addressing, which is around safety, privacy. And I think there is a role to play both for the brands that are active in it, the tech companies that are building it, as well as potentially there is a role for regulation as well, just to make sure that we don't, again, make the same mistakes that we did in the past.
We are reaching the end of our session, so thank you very much, Fernanda. Thank you very much, Hamza, for being here with us. I admit that I feel much more enlightened about the metaverse now and how it can be useful for multiple purposes. And I also took note about the book. I think it's very useful.
Fantastic.
E muito obrigada também a você que nos acompanha em vídeo e em podcast. Para entrar em contato com os nossos especialistas, nosso e-mail é mckinsey-talks@mckinsey.com. Você também pode nos enviar perguntas. Participe! A agenda completa do McKinsey Talks está no mckinseytalks.com. Lá você também pode conferir este episódio e os anteriores em vídeo ou em podcast. É isso aí, muito obrigada e até a próxima!